Scott Cunningham emerged from a high lineage family, whose roots ran deep in the fertile soil of Columbus, Ohio. He was born in a Victorian mansion, built with the Cunninghams' fortune, where the scent of wealth and privilege permeated the air. The shadow of tragedy, however, cast itself upon Scott at the tender age of 10. His mother, a woman of ethereal beauty and a gentle heart, succumbed to the relentless cold of pneumonia. On that fateful day, as the wind howled outside, Scott held his mother's pale, cold hand, his eyes filled with tears that refused to fall. No more than 3 months later, on a gray afternoon, Scott heard the sound of high heels echoing down the hallway. His father's face, Christian Cunningham, appeared in the room, accompanied by a woman of stunning beauty and fiery gaze. Alicia, his new stepmother, was a strange and uncomfortable presence in young Scott's life. Alicia, the stepmother, seemed to have no patience or affection for Scott. Her icy blue eyes rarely landed on him, and when they did, they were devoid of any warmth. The situation worsened significantly when Alicia gave birth to her own children. The Cunningham family, once united, fragmented into awkward silences and discontented glances. When Scott turned 18, the opulence of the Cunningham family secured him a place at one of the most prestigious universities in the country. He enrolled in an engineering course, a discipline that had always fascinated him. On the day of his departure for university, as the family celebrated with champagne and forced laughter, Scott looked into Alicia's impassive face and felt a tight knot in his chest. That was the beginning of a new phase of his life, far from the oppressive Cunningham mansion. Scott arrived at the university carrying not only the pressure of being a Cunningham on his shoulders but also the determination to truly dedicate himself to his studies. He was a slender young man, always well-groomed, and his glasses gave him an intellectual air. However, his discreet charm went unnoticed by the women at the university, who seemed to prefer more conventionally attractive types. In this new environment, Scott soon found a loyal friend in Bruce, a cheerful and relaxed guy who always seemed to see the positive side of life. In one of their early conversations while studying together in the library, Bruce said, "Scott, don't worry about the girls. University is not just about that. We're here to learn, right?" Scott smiled, grateful for Bruce's comforting presence. The university also introduced him to Iris, a fellow student who, like him, had a passion for learning. She was a law student, always seen with a book in hand and reading glasses perched on the tip of her nose. Iris, like Scott, was an academic enthusiast, a bit of a nerd, but genuine. They first met in the library, both seeking the same law book. "Seems like we have a similar taste in literature," Iris joked, pointing to the book. Scott laughed, and their friendship blossomed from there. With the constant presence and support of Bruce and Iris, life at the university became easier for Scott. The emotional and academic burden seemed lighter, and he began to discover the true value of having reliable friends. The trio spent countless hours together, studying, laughing, and sharing experiences. Over time, they became more than just university friends, they were a chosen family, helping each other navigate the tumultuous university life. On a cool spring night, Scott and Bruce ventured into a university party. The music thumped in Scott's chest as he watched the crowd of young faces dancing and laughing. Then his eyes landed on a dazzling figure, dancing with captivating grace. His heart raced at the sight of the girl, like a drum beating in a frenetic rhythm. Later, he discovered that the dancer's name was Tessa, a student in the physical education program. Her beauty was dazzling, her smile enchanting, and her energy contagious. Scott couldn't help but be charmed by her. "Bruce," Scott confessed as he watched Tessa from afar, "I'm smitten with her. It's something I can't explain." Bruce, always the sensible friend, gave him a concerned look. "Scott, you need to be careful. Tessa is beautiful, yes, but she's popular. These girls, well, they don't usually pay much attention to guys like us. Bruce hesitated before continuing, "And what about Iris? You two get along so well. Have you ever considered that there might be something more there?" Scott shook his head, his face serious. "No, Bruce. What Iris and I have is just friendship. Nothing more." Bruce's gaze was filled with worry, but he nodded, respecting his friend's decision. However, the night brought an unexpected change for Scott, the blossoming of a feeling he had never experienced before, and with it, a new complexity in his already tumultuous university life. Semesters at the university slipped away like leaves in the wind, strengthening the friendship between Scott, Iris, and Bruce with each step. They were an inseparable trio, always together, always laughing, always sharing. However, a silent secret pulsed in Iris's heart: she was in love with Scott. On a sunny afternoon, as they walked through the university garden, Iris, bravely, decided to open her heart. With flushed cheeks and a heart beating like a drum, she whispered, "Scott, I need to tell you something." However, before she could complete her confession, a group of students, the popular ones, crossed their path. In the center of the group, radiating confidence and charm, was Tessa. Her eyes sparkled with curiosity as she approached Scott and Iris. "Are you two dating?" Tessa asked, playfulness in her gaze as she looked at Scott. Scott, wanting to impress Tessa, quickly responded, "No, we're just friends. I would never date a girl like Iris." Scott's response shattered Iris's heart. A wave of pain flooded her eyes, but she managed to keep a stoic face. Tessa, on the other hand, seemed delighted with Scott's answer, and from that day on, she began paying more attention to him. However, Scott didn't realize the damage he had caused. He was too busy enjoying Tessa's attention, oblivious to the storm he had unleashed in his best friend's heart. The next day, shocking news hit Scott like a lightning bolt. Iris had left, moved to Europe to attend a renowned university where she had been admitted years ago. Bruce, with a serious look and a firm voice, confronted Scott. "Do you realize what you've done, Scott? You hurt her, and now she's gone." Scott, however, seemed surprised and defensive. "She was hasty, Bruce," he replied, crossing his arms. "She should have understood that I only said that to impress Tessa." Bruce shook his head, a mix of disappointment and frustration in his eyes. "Scott, you hurt Iris. She was your friend, and you treated her as if she meant nothing to you. Now she's on the other side of the ocean, all because you wanted to impress Tessa." Scott fell silent, Bruce's words echoing in his mind. He looked at the empty spot in the library where Iris used to sit, and a sense of loss hit him. He had lost a true friend, all because of an attempt to impress a girl. Over time, the closeness between Scott and Tessa deepened, evolving from mere attraction to something more profound. They spent hours together, sharing laughter and deep conversations, and soon, a relationship blossomed between them. Bruce, ever watchful, looked on with concern at the emerging romance. "Scott," he warned one day, as they watched Tessa laughing with some friends, "are you sure about this? I can't help but think that Tessa may be more interested in your family's money than in you." Scott, however, seemed undeterred by Bruce's suspicions. "She's not like that, Bruce," he replied, his eyes following Tessa. "She cares about me. I can feel it." It didn't take long for Scott to make his relationship with Tessa official. The news spread through the university like wildfire, fueling gossip and speculation. Scott, however, was oblivious to it all. He was in love, and nothing else seemed to matter. Bruce's warning about Tessa was just a distant noise, lost in the echo of his heart beating for Tessa's name. On a gray afternoon, Tessa brought news that shook Scott's life like a storm: she was pregnant. The revelation hit Scott like a lightning bolt, leaving him stunned and incredulous. Tessa's deeply rooted traditional family pressured for an arranged marriage. They argued that it was the right thing to do given the circumstance. Christian Cunningham, Scott's father, displayed concern and warned his son. "Scott," he said, his piercing eyes fixed on his son's, "a child should not be a reason for a rushed marriage. This girl may have ulterior motives, perhaps a fortune hunter." Bruce echoed Christian's concerns. "Scott, you need to think this through. Marriage is a serious matter, it's not something you should do on impulse." Scott, however, was blinded by love for Tessa. "I love Tessa," he insisted, "and I will marry her, regardless of what everyone thinks." With unwavering determination, Scott sealed his fate by marrying Tessa. He disregarded the warnings of his father and Bruce, choosing to believe in his heart that he was doing the right thing. However, only time would tell if the love he held for Tessa would be enough to overcome the challenges that would surely come their way. Despite the warnings and objections, Scott and Tessa joined together in matrimony in a simple yet love-filled ceremony. The following weeks and months brought a tranquility that Scott had never experienced before. Radiant happiness permeated the couple's life, marking the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. The arrival of their son, Dustin, brought an even greater degree of joy. Dustin was born healthy, with bright eyes and a smile that melted the hearts of both parents. Scott and Tessa seemed to radiate happiness, cherishing every moment with their little treasure. Christian, despite his initial reservations, decided to provide the couple with an apartment to live in. He wanted his son and grandson to have a comfortable and secure home. Alicia, Scott's stepmother, was not pleased with the decision. She complained and expressed her discontent, but Christian remained unwavering. He knew it was best for his son and grandson. Thus, despite the adversities and objections, Scott, Tessa, and little Dustin began building a life together, enjoying the happiness and normalcy that had seemed out of reach for so long. It dawned as an ordinary day, with the sun rising on the horizon and birds singing their morning melodies. Nothing indicated that this day would change Scott's life forever. The phone rang, breaking the morning tranquility. On the other end of the line, a somber voice brought the news that shattered Scott's world. His father, the figure who had always represented an unwavering stronghold in his life, had died in a tragic accident. The words fell upon Scott like a punch, robbing him of breath, leaving him wordless and reeling in disbelief. Days later, at the funeral, Scott found himself face to face with Alicia and his half-siblings, a tense gathering permeated with thinly veiled antipathy. Alicia, in her pretentious mourning, barely acknowledged him, and his half-siblings, despite sharing the same father, cast cold and distant glances in his direction. They never liked Scott, thanks to Alicia's negative influence, that much was clear, but their father's death seemed to have further accentuated the animosity. With grief weighing on his heart and the air filled with bitterness and resentment, Scott bid farewell to his father, a hero in his eyes, now lost forever. And he felt more alone than ever. But the worst was yet to come. When the dust of the initial shock began to settle, Scott discovered that his father had left him only the apartment they lived in. His stepmother, Alicia, and his half-siblings had inherited the remaining fortune. The young man who once enjoyed a comfortable life now found himself with nothing. I don't know what to do, Bruce, Scott confessed one day, as he held little Dustin in his arms. I can't afford to stay in college with Dustin to take care of, and I can't rely on my father's inheritance. Bruce, with a concerned look, simply shook his head. This is really complicated, Scott. But you'll figure something out. You always do. And he tried. Leaving college behind, Scott started working as a waiter in a local restaurant. It was a harsh change, a reality much different from what he was accustomed to, but he had no choice. He had a child to support, and he would do whatever it took to ensure Dustin's well-being. And so, Amidst diaper changes and long shifts at the restaurant, Scott tried to keep his head above water, navigating the new life that had been imposed upon him. The peaceful life that Scott and Tessa had built together began to crumble. Arguments became frequent and intense, with Tessa often expressing her dissatisfaction with the life they were leading. "Scott, this is not life. We're always struggling to survive, this is not what I want," she exclaimed in one of their heated discussions. "You're not capable of giving us a better life, you're a failure." Tessa's words, cruel and cold, cut Scott deeply. With each accusation, each harsh word, he felt as if a dagger was being plunged into his chest. On a gray morning, Scott woke up to an unsettling emptiness. The side of the bed normally occupied by Tessa was empty and cold. A sense of panic began to settle in his chest. His gaze settled on an envelope resting on her pillow, familiar yet tense handwriting adorning its surface. With a knot in his stomach, he opened the envelope. Inside, a handwritten letter, the ink still fresh in some places. Each word he read felt like a punch to the gut. "Scott," the letter began. "I'm writing this because I don't have the courage to say it in person. I can't live like this anymore. The life we have, the life you have to offer, is not enough for me. I want more. I need more. I know it may seem selfish, but I think it's time to think about myself. I know that I love you, but love alone is not enough to fill the void I feel. I need to pursue a better life, a better future. I need to seek a life that, I'm sorry, Scott, I don't think you can give me. I'm leaving Dustin with you. I know you will be a great father to him. You have a good heart, Scott. I only ask that you take good care of our son." Tears began to fall from Scott's eyes as he read the final words of the letter. Tessa had left, abandoning him and leaving their son behind for him to care for alone. Scott felt lost, devastated, but he knew he had to pull himself together. After all, he was no longer alone, he had Dustin, his son, to take care of. Scott felt as if the world had crumbled beneath him. He was alone, without the woman he loved, and with a child to raise. That's when Bruce, his longtime friend, came to his aid. Instead of reproaching Scott with an "I told you so," Bruce chose to be a supportive shoulder. "Scott, I'm so sorry about all of this," he said, "but you're not alone. I'm here to help in any way I can." And so, Scott, even amidst the storm his life had become, found in Bruce a safe harbor, a friend who would help him navigate the challenges that lay ahead. Scott, now a single father, plunged into a chaotic and exhausting routine. He was a chameleon in the job market, taking on any role that would guarantee his son's livelihood. The sun barely rose and he was already up, lacing his boots soiled with cement and dust, ready for a day of work as a mason's assistant. At night, he traded the hammer for an apron and tray, serving tables at a local restaurant. On weekends, he transformed into a delivery driver, maneuvering his old motorcycle through streets and avenues in search of extra tips. And so, amidst uniform changes and scarce hours of sleep, Dustin, his son, grew up and turned 5. The wrinkles on Scott's face told stories of sacrifice and determination, all to ensure that Dustin never lacked anything. Then, one day, a business opportunity arose. A coworker presented Scott with a business plan to open a health supplement store. The promise of substantial profits and the chance to provide a better life for Dustin made Scott risk everything on that venture. And, at first, it seemed like luck had finally smiled upon him. The store thrived, and for a brief moment, Scott felt he had found a way out of his hardships. However, a year later, reality dealt a cruel blow. Scott discovered that his business partner, the man who convinced him to embark on this venture, was a scammer. He had vanished, leaving behind a failed store, a colossal debt in Scott's name, and a money laundering investigation. Scott found himself in the midst of a perfect storm, facing a financial and legal crisis that threatened to swallow him whole. And most importantly, it threatened the future he had worked so hard to build for Dustin. With the weight of debt weighing on his shoulders, Scott made the difficult decision to sell the apartment that had once been the home of the family he had dreamt of building. He and Dustin moved into a tiny apartment, a claustrophobic space that barely fit the two of them, but it was all they could afford. In this time of need, Scott reached out to Bruce, his longtime friend and Dustin's godfather. Though they had lost touch over the years, Scott hoped that Bruce could still help him. "Bruce, I need your help," Scott confessed in a phone call, his voice muffled and weary. Bruce, without hesitation, replied, "Scott, you're my friend. You and Dustin are family. Of course, I'll help. I know someone who can handle your situation." Bruce provided Scott with the address of a reputable law firm in the city. "Talk to Iris, she's the owner of the firm. She'll help you, I'm sure of it," Bruce said, injecting a glimmer of hope into Scott's weary heart. Iris, the name sounded familiar to Scott, but he was so desperate for help that he didn't stop to consider where he knew that name from. With the address in hand and a thread of hope, Scott was ready to fight for his life and Dustin's. Walking into the imposing office, with its walls adorned in fine wood and the scent of leather and paper, Scott felt a lump in his throat. He wasn't prepared for what he saw next. Behind the large mahogany desk was Iris, the same Iris from their college days, the same Iris whose heart he had broken years ago. The surprise was so great that Scott could barely hide it. "Iris," he stammered, his voice caught in his throat. "Scott," she greeted him, a small smile forming on her lips. "I see Bruce didn't tell you who I was." Swallowing hard, Scott managed to respond. "He didn't mention. I'm sorry, Iris, for everything." Iris waved her hand, a graceful and effortless gesture. "The past is in the past, Scott. I'm here to help you now." And she did just that. Iris, with her sharp intelligence and legal skills, worked tirelessly on Scott's case. She dismantled the accusations one by one, proving Scott's innocence of all charges. When the judge announced the decision, Scott felt as if a heavy weight had been lifted off his shoulders. He felt a wave of gratitude for Iris, so strong that he could barely express it. "Iris, I don't know how to thank you. You saved my life, Dustin's life." Iris smiled at him, her gaze gentle and understanding. "It's not over, Scott. We still have a long way to go." Scott furrowed his brow as Iris mentioned the long road they still had ahead. She leaned forward, clasping her hands on the polished wooden table. "Scott," she began, her expression serious. "There are many inconsistencies in your father's accident story. Based on what you've told me, I think we should open an investigation." With unwavering determination, Iris began unraveling the web of companies that composed Scott's late father's empire. She delved into mountains of documents, articles of association, contracts, and financial records, spending countless nights in the office, scouring every line for irregularities. As the layers of deceit began to unravel, a network of fraud and deception emerged, so intricate and vast that it seemed like an endless labyrinth of corruption. At the center of this labyrinth, like the spider spinning the web, was Alicia, Scott's stepmother, in collusion with the man who had once been his father's right-hand man. Together, they had built a scheme of corruption and deceit that was shocking in its audacity and scope. But Iris's revelations didn't stop there. Upon reviewing the accident forensics reports that claimed Christian's life, she noticed inconsistencies and evidence of sabotage. Iris hired an expert in car accidents, who confirmed her suspicions. Scott's father's accident had not been an accident at all but a carefully planned act of sabotage. And there was more. Iris, faced with all the crimes committed by Alicia, filed a court order and requested a DNA test for her children. She noticed that they bore no resemblance to the photos Scott showed of his father. It was discovered that they were not Christian's legitimate children but the product of betrayal. Alicia had manipulated everyone around her to keep the secret. Each discovery was a piece of the puzzle that Iris meticulously put together. And with each piece that fit, each truth revealed, Scott came one step closer to reclaiming his rightful inheritance and seeking justice for his father. With these discoveries, the Cunningham family fortune returned to Scott, the sole and true heir. Alicia and several company executives were arrested, and Scott's half-siblings, who had previously rejected and expelled him, were now left helpless. "This is just the beginning, Scott," Iris said, with a determined gleam in her eyes. "We still have a lot of work ahead of us. But together, we will bring justice to your father." Amidst a celebration filled with wine and laughter, Scott hosted a grand dinner to commemorate the victory. He invited Bruce, his loyal friend and his family, and Iris, the woman whose intelligence and determination had brought light to the truth and justice to his legacy. The aroma of home-cooked food filled the air as the guests gathered around the dining table, filled with delicious dishes and a toast of gratitude for being together after so many years. As the dinner progressed, conversation flowed freely, from funny stories of the past to profound discussions about the future. At the end of the dinner, Scott stood up, his eyes shining with sincerity and determination. He raised his glass and made a toast. "To Tessa, I allowed myself to be blinded by a fleeting passion disconnected from the family business," he confessed. "I didn't give the attention I should have to my father, and neither to you, Iris." There was a respectful silence as Scott addressed Iris. "Iris," he continued, "you have always been the loyal friend, the person I could trust. I ignored you, and for that, I apologize. I was blind, but now I see. And I see you, Iris. I would like a chance to redeem myself, to explore a future where we can be more than friends." Iris watched him attentively, with a gentle smile and understanding eyes. She then stood up and replied, "Scott, you are an amazing man, and I have great respect and affection for you. But the passion I had for you has passed. We have grown, we have changed. Our time has already passed. I think it's best for us to remain friends." It was an honest and kind response, and although Scott felt a pang in his heart and the guilt of having rejected her in the past, he knew that he respected and valued Iris's friendship too much to risk losing it. And so, the evening ended with a toast to friendship and the promise of a better future. It was a sunny morning, the golden light bathing Scott's now prosperous living room. He sat comfortably on his leather couch, contemplating how life had changed. Wealth had returned, but the lessons of humility and resilience were deeply engraved in his soul. The silence of his reflection was interrupted by the sound of the doorbell. He opened the door and found himself face to face with a figure from the past, Tessa. She looked visibly older, and the arrogance that once overflowed from her eyes had been replaced by an air of desperation. "Scott," she began, "I heard the news. About your fortune, about everything. I made a mistake. I would like to come back to you and Dustin." Scott observed her for a moment before responding. "Tessa," he started, "you abandoned Dustin and me when we needed you the most. You chose money, lust, and left us alone. I cannot and will not allow you to come back and disturb the peace we have built." Tessa's expression faltered, but before she could respond, Scott continued, "And one more thing, Tessa. You will have to answer for abandoning Dustin. I will have my lawyers hold you accountable." Tessa's expression turned into a mask of shock and fear. Scott closed the door, leaving her on the outside, helpless and alone, just as she had left him and Dustin years ago. Instead of feeling hurt or bitter, Scott felt a sense of relief. He knew he had made the right decision. He had found the strength within himself to rise up, and now he was determined to protect his son's future and his own. With Iris and Bruce by his side, he was ready to face any challenges life might throw his way. And so, Scott's story, a tale of losses and gains, love and betrayal, and above all, resilience and redemption, came to a serene end. He was now ready to start a new chapter in his life, one of peace, prosperity, and genuine happiness. And what about you? What would you have done in Scott's place? Let me know in the comments because I'm curious to find out. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our stories. See you in the next video.